going on.
How are you going to do Saturday night, Rabbi?
Welcome, everyone. I'll go over that right now to our Zoom/YouTube discussion on Wednesday for the week. We're continuing to talk about Passover. Started a little late because we were just talking. And one of the questions is, how are we going to do the Seder Saturday night? It is going to be filmed at my house. We're going to have two cameras, one a wide, one a, what do they call it? Not panning in, but what does it mean when they zoom in? And then I'm going to have a computer screen. And then I'm going to invite people who I call ahead of time to read certain passages from the Haggadah. The Haggadah is going to be sent out on a link, and I'm going to put it on the Zoom page as well as on Zoom so you can see it. Anybody here want to read, by the way, for Passover part? Anybody want to participate if you're coming?
No,
We don't know where we're going to be with the
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should have done it on the second night. We're doing on first night because last year we did on first night because nobody could do Seders. I didn't think, this year people are getting together a little bit more, so probably more Seders are happening. But you can watch it on Saturday night. It'll be live, but then it's going to be also available for Sunday night if you want.
Oh, okay.
About how
It's
long
already going to be done. It won't be live, but it'll be done.
About how long will the Seder be before prior to the start? I assume it'll go up to what they call the festive meal, right?
No, what we're going to do is we're going to do an hour Seder.
An hour?
We're going to just kind of skip the meal because really, if you eat the matzah, that's all you need to do.
Okay.
And then we'll go through. The first part will be 45 minutes. The second part will be 15 minutes. And again, just to give everybody some sort of semblance of Seder, you're not going to do a full 3-hour Seder.
I'm just
Online.
planning so that if we have our own Seder, with the meal will
Right.
be after then.
Exactly.
Just before, yeah. Okay.
Right. So it's going to start at 6, finish 7-ish, maybe a little bit after 7.
Okay.
I'm sending out a giant Haggadah, almost finished with it. I'll probably go out tomorrow or Friday, so everybody will have access to the Haggadah themselves. And then, so you can follow along, and there'll be a lot of stuff I won't be doing in the Haggadah, but I put the whole Haggadah in there.
You're
It's
doing
supposed to be
this as a Zoom or as a webinar?
It's going to be Zoom or YouTube, kind of like what we're doing now.
Okay, but people will mute themselves, obviously, in the background.
Well, somebody else is going to be running it. Like, it's not like that's Jennifer
Yeah.
or somebody else is going to be. There's going to be several people because I can't do it myself. I can't lead the Seder. We're going to actually have real cameras. So I'll be manning the Seder. 2 people will be doing the cameras, and Jennifer's going to be doing the computer.
Oh, great.
We're like big time here, baby. Let me tell you.
Well, it's much appreciated.
Yeah,
Sounds like Spielberg.
it is pretty much. We had him bid for it, but we really didn't like the way he was going to film it.
Yeah, he doesn't do
And
good
so-
special effects.
Yeah, the special effects are pricey, so we decided that we're not going to go Spielberg this year. Maybe next year.
You will have a parting of the Red Sea, though, right?
We will possibly. I also have a family one the night before, so we'll figure out if any of the stuff works from there. We'll go. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Yes, hi. Just got back from the dentist. Sorry we're late.
No, we're just starting. We've just been going over some fun aspects of what we're going to be doing. So I have a question. We talked about kitniot. Who here feels like it's okay to eat kitniot now? Corn and stuff. Do you feel it is because of the conservative movement, or were you already doing it?
No, because of the conservative movement. I mean,
Yes.
in our house, it was always my wife comes from a reform background, and they ate it, and she was she could never understand why I wouldn't, and we always discussed it every year, and but now we do. Although there are still some things that I won't eat, like a corn tortilla. It just I guess you can eat it, but it just somehow it's wrong.
Right.
Even if it's right, it's wrong. But maybe I might break down this year. You never know.
No.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience growing up. My paternal grandmother was Orthodox,
Oh,
and and so when we had Seder, it was always at her house, and my father would read the entire Haggadah in Hebrew without taking a breath. And we would have our little cups of whatever it was, grape juice. And when he raised his wine, we raised our grape juice. But he just read it in Hebrew from beginning to end, and we didn't know what was going on. Yeah, it was really unique.
Any of us.
I remember my grandfather, my father's father, his Seders. I don't think we ate until like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night.
Different world. I didn't eat corn or peanuts during Seder growing up, but I was allergic to them, so that was the only reason. And I think we didn't eat. I think we just had matzah the first night. I don't know if we didn't eat bread the whole week. I think might have taken matzah to school just to show all the kids, but I think we had bread during the week. I can't remember though. So it's interesting to. Sorry, Larry. All right, so let's go over some aspects of Passover then. So first of all, my favorite question, of course, is always who created the sandwich? I ask that all the time.
Hello.
The Earl of Sandwich.
The Earl of Sandwich is generally the answer. So the Earl of Sandwich, John Montague, he was nicknamed Gem Twitcher. He was a gambler. And so he was famous because he didn't like leaving the gambling table, that he would ask the servants to bring the meat to him and just put it between two slices of bread. Some would say it's Hillel because obviously Hillel predates this guy by many generations, but that's kind of like the one it's done now. In 1776, on July 4th, Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams were given the task of designing the American seal. What did Jefferson suggest?
Good question.
One on the Liberty Bell, isn't it?
No idea.
Isn't it, what's the words that are on the Liberty Bell? Proclaim liberty throughout the land.
Oh, interesting. His design included Moses standing on the shore, extending his hand over the sea, causing Pharaoh to be overrun, who's sitting on a chariot, who had the crown in his hair, and raised, representing the pillar of fire. So that was the seal he proposed. So that's kind of weird, but that's a strange thing. Yes?
Get it.
So I just thought always nice to have some interesting tidbits. Now, for Passover, we also know that it is found in the Mishnah. It is also in the Talmud, obviously. There's a whole section on it. And one of the discussion questions, which I think we may have done last week, was where do you search? And where was the decision?
Well, I think it's everywhere.
In and around the kitchen, I thought we said, and places where you might find food.
Right. The general answer is you check everywhere you might find food, and places that you don't. Some would say you can just make a cursory check. Others say you need to make a little bit more thorough, but not as thorough everywhere else. Now, when are we supposed to clean our houses for Passover this year, and why is this year a little different?
Yeah, because it's the night before, but the night before is Shabbat, so you
Right.
do it if you're traditionally religious.
Right. So it really means you'll be keeping, if you're traditional, 9 days of Passover this year. 2 days at the beginning, 2 days at the end. Those are the holidays. And then the 4 days in the middle. And then the extra Saturday beforehand, because this Saturday is the day before. So Passover ends when the sun goes down on Saturday night. Thus, you can't clean on Saturday. You can't prepare for Passover on Saturday. You can't do the lighting with the lighting the fire and burning the lads chametz. You can't look for chametz. So this means your house has to be Passover ready by Friday. Some would say Friday morning. Some would say around noon. So It's so you'll be keeping a lot more Passover. So you have one more day of eating matzah, which is never good. Larry.
Yeah, I remember my mother had some sort of a tradition, I guess, that was after she cleaned she took a feather and a candle, and she did go over, I'm not sure she went over the whole house, but did at least do part of the house symbolically. And then she had like a wooden spoon, and she tied it all together, and we took it outside and we burned it.
Oh, really?
Burning the chametz. Does anybody recall burning the chametz as a tradition?
I know the tradition. I've done it before, but I don't remember going outside and doing it the way you said.
Yeah,
I learned about it. I
People
mean,
would bring their chametz outside, and it would be, the 3 or 4 objects: the feather, the candle, the wooden spoon. Generally, would all be tied together, and you'd light a little fire to it on the street.
Oh, of months, what's this?
One more time, Flossie.
I'm sorry?
What'd you say? I thought you said something. I couldn't hear what you said.
I had an open mic. She was reading my notes when she
Oh, okay.
came in, so apologies.
No worries. All right. When was the first Seder? The official first Seder, considered by rabbis.
We don't think it was the Last Supper.
It was not. It's not the first Seder. The first Seder all time. The rabbis say it is the anniversary of the 10th plague. So if the 10th plague was on, Nisan the 14th, 1 year later on Nisan the 14th was the original Seder. That's at least what the rabbis say. So that means the plague of the is that day traditionally thought.
In the chronology of events of the Exodus, the 10th plague is the killing of the firstborn of the Egyptians, right?
Mhm.
And then we were supposed to have painted the doorposts of the house with the blood of the lamb, right?
Right.
That was the Passover, so the angel of death passes over. And that was prior to the 10th plague then, right? In other words, so the angel, I guess that had to take place before the 10th plague, so they know which house to go to.
Yeah, exactly. They did it before.
How soon after the 10th plague did the Exodus supposedly happen? Was it like an immediate thing? Like,
Yeah, it was the very next day. So,
10th plague, yeah.
well, the 10th plague came at midnight. Of course, we don't know what at midnight means, because obviously they didn't have the modern clocks. We don't know what God's conception of time is, what the midpoint of evening is. And so then they were made to rush the next day out. Now, as for putting the blood on the doors, there's a very interesting section in a clip in the 10 Commandments, the one from the 50s, where I think it's Edward G. Robinson is a Egyptian who's in love with his slave, who was an Israelite. And one of the Israelites is in love with her, and she's in love with him. And after an argument with this guy, he goes and paints the blood on his doorposts. So when he wakes up, he's still alive, but then the Egyptians force him to go with the Israelites, even though he doesn't want to, because of that. So it was, I still remember that scene. I didn't think I understood it when I first saw it, but now I do. So from the perspective of the people with their movies, anyone who had the blood on the doorposts was survived. Not just the Jews, because we know there were non-Jews who went with them. So, but we don't know how it was done. Did all the Jewish slaves go to the friends or the other slaves or to the people who treated them well and say, please do this? And if they did that, were all people who did put the blood on the doorpost required to leave, even if they didn't want to? So akin to like, I'm a slave, but I'm a high slave. I'm like, and slavery in Egypt was not as probably as bad as slavery in America. It was a different form. But I'm like the head, butler at a very wealthy person's estate and somebody put blood on my doorpost, but I don't want to leave. I like my job. This is the best job I'd probably have the ability to get. Was I able to stay, or was I forced out by just having the blood on the door? So that's Flossie.
Why would a non-Jew want to go, feeling his life would be better than being a slave? It's still the question of the unknown, what's beyond there.
Well, there's two things here. One, if you truly believe this God was going to do some terrible things, you would probably want to put the blood on your door to save your children or your child. So that's one. Two, some may have believed and become Jewish, which is probably what happened. Some were just friends and they were all in the boat together. Others probably thought freedom was better than there, or others probably left thinking they could go back home at some point. So that part is not really discussed. All we do know is that there were non-Jews who went with them. And that's that word mixed multitude that we hear so often. I mean, it's not heard so often, it's referred to so often, Larry.
You know, as we know with this pandemic and with others, that pandemics know no borders. You know, once you start something, whether it's frogs or vermin or, you know, cattle disease, but that affects everybody, right? This was the only one that was really supposedly specific, that all of the other plagues, you know, darkness and cattle boils and whatever it was, you know, the other 9 plagues. So it is unusual that the last one is singled out, like God, you know, all of a sudden is hurting everybody in the first 9, Israelites and Egyptians, right? They're all being affected by all of these things.
There is debate on that, though.
Oh,
So there are some who believe that the Israelites were not affected when dark came. They were given the ability to see at night. Obviously they didn't own land, so the grasshoppers did not affect them. They didn't get infected. So it does not say that in the text, except for, you're right, for the 10th plague is the only one that specifically says that, you know, for things like blood in the water, did the Israelite slave well have regular water that was still working? And what if the Egyptians co-opted it? Did it then turn to blood because the Egyptians had taken it? These are the little questions that, you know, like you said. So Flossie and Jeff?
You want me?
No, Jeff,
Ladies first.
you
Tell me,
already
ladies
went.
first. How many Israelites did not leave when they left?
Quite a few.
That is a question we don't know. There's no evidence of any of this, as we've talked about. Did all of them leave? We don't know. There are a bunch of theories. The most prevalent theory, I think, today, and I'm keeping up, is that there were Israelites. Well, one of them is Israelites and Hebrews may have been different groups of people. And that the Hebrews escaped Egypt and then went to live with the Israelites, or they were descendants of each other from hundreds of years earlier. So when the Hebrews were going to Israel, it was because they already knew folk there. So that's why they went.
Yeah, that's pretty logical.
Who stayed, we don't know. That is a good question. It would depend on, one, if you put blood on the doorpost, were you required to leave even if you didn't want to? And two, if you know, you did put if you're a Hebrew, but you didn't put the blood on the doorpost and someone died, but you still wanted to leave, it's, you know, from the text, it sounds like a lot of different people just joined in on the movement. You know, this is freedom for this one group, and we're just jumping on the bandwagon, getting out of here. It's, you know, the grass has got to be greener, which is, you know, not hard to believe.
Right, Rabbi. You know, when we think about it, look what Egypt has just gone through with the other 9 plagues and then the 10th plague.
Right.
I would say a lot of people would be making traveling plans at that time.
Right.
You know, it was, picture if we had 10 consecutive hurricanes in a row and the last one had a tidal wave with it also.
Yeah.
I think we'd be willing to leave the low country at that point.
Yeah. And it's, again, it depends on your belief in gods and that and such forth. You know, it's also the end of the, not the end of this dynasty, but a low point in the dynasty. It's going to rise pretty quickly afterwards, but this is apparently a low point in the dynasty that the pharaoh is at. Could be Ramses II. So, you know, all this stuff is speculation because it doesn't go into the specifics of these questions. So when we interpret them, that means we can't be wrong.
Good guesses.
Excuse me.
Having a tough time.
Sorry about that. So that's another interesting question about them is when did they celebrate the first one? Who left? We also don't know how long they were there. Some would say, I mean, that there's discrepancies in the text for the amount of time they were there. Were they there 400 years, 420 years, 200 years? It's not known exactly. Even when you say year, what is a year? For us, we're on the solar calendar, but they were using some sort of lunar calendar. So a year may have been shorter or longer. Also, the word year may not mean year. It could be season. It could be 400 seasons they were there. So just because if we knew who the pharaoh was, then it would be a lot easier to decipher when they were there, because we have a fairly accurate list of pharaohs through the ages. And of course, there's a lot of, you know, archaeology on the subject, and they found countless things. They just 2 weeks ago, they found another big one. So that's the big clue. If you could figure out who the pharaoh is, everything they're doing is centering on who the pharaoh is and what the situation in Egypt is at the time. And so they try and take a low point in Egypt in history and match it to a pharaoh. Most obviously, they're building the city of Ramses. That's why Ramses is often chosen as him, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination the only pharaoh that people think. There's several they think. And so, any questions? Before I cough up a lung, I apologize. So, any questions? So, when it comes to the food for Passover, why are the Ashkenazics so much stricter than the Sephardim? And we all know that the Sephardim do not have any troubles or problems eating corn or peanuts. If you get a kosher for Passover bag of bamba, which is the peanut snack that is like the #1 snack in Israel, it will say kosher for Passover, and you turn around and the first ingredient is peanuts, because it's kosher for Passover if you are Sephardic. So why are the Sephardim so much more lenient? And it's a very interesting historical perspective, something that affects Americans, affects everywhere. The Ashkenazic Jews are obviously the Jews that were living in Eastern Europe, sent in the Pale Settlement in the 17th century, living in Poland. We all know the places: Ukraine, Lithuania, Russia, parts of Germany. When you think of these people, do you think of them? What movie do you think most of?
Fiddler.
Fiddler on the Roof. The shtetl. A lot of these people are living in shtetls, and a lot of them are living in walled cities. I mean, walled off areas, which we know as ghettos. So the majority of these Jews are living in ghettos and shtetls. There is a small percentage that live in cities and are fairly affluent. On the other side of the coin, the Sephardic Jews were living in Babylon and North Africa in a very inside the world. There were restrictions, but they were living in the world. They had jobs working for the kings. They had jobs as traders, as builders, as accountants. They had in Spain, they were given a lot of opportunity, they were writers. And so they were a lot more out there in the world. So one of the reasons why there's this restriction is that the Orthodox Jews had a lot of time to make rules because they were educated just in the Jewish world. So they spent all their time debating Jewish subjects. And so they just kept adding more and more rules for everything. Whereas the Sephardic Jews didn't have to worry about that. They're studying both math and religion. They're studying, Shakespeare and the Talmud. So they have a much broader education, so they don't feel the need to just sit there and make rules. So that's one generality. The second has a lot to do with liberal Jews and what's gone on in the world in the last 300 years. In the world, what are the names of the movements? There's the Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist. There's other ones like Renewal, Humanistic. Every single one of these movements is Ashkenazic. There are no Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist movements in the Sephardic world. They did not have a liberal religious denomination. And that makes a huge difference because you don't have competition. What does that mean? If you want to be part of our Orthodox world, you have to not eat all of these things and you stay in our world. We need you to stay here. We don't want you to leave our world. In the Sephardic world, they don't care because if you leave being religiously Sephardic, you're not going to become a Reformed Sephardic Jew. You're either going to be with us or you're not going to be with us at all. There's no competition in the Sephardic world at all when it comes to religion. So we had Jane.
It's funny that you're saying this, not haha funny, but when the Kitanyot ruling had come down, I guess it was about 7 years ago, right? We were conservative. And I remember the rabbi saying that one of the reasons that they had decided at this point to combine the two sets of what you could follow was because they didn't want to separate the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim.
And that was one of the reasons, and that was a really interesting one, Ron.
But today, if you say that you're Sephardic, it's taken for granted that you're Orthodox.
Exactly. And that's the whole point.
All of these synagogues, Sephardic, are all Orthodox.
That's right. In the Sephardic world, you only go to an Orthodox synagogue. They don't even call it really Orthodox. I mean, they do, but it's not really because there's no option. There is no competition. So I'm an Orthodox Sephardic rabbi. I'm not worried that Ron and Jeff are going to go across the street to the Sephardic Reform synagogue. I'm not worried you're going to go to the Sephardic Conservative synagogue. There's not a competition. I don't have to worry. So do whatever you want. I'm not going to try and keep you here. I'm not so worried that we're going to lose you to the outsiders. And so it's really interesting because if you go into Israel and you read the response, the rabbis giving their take on rules. In Israel, you have these very ultra-Orthodox Sephardic rabbis. Some of them are very famous. Some of them are very notorious. But when you read their decisions, they are very liberal, very liberal. Whereas the Ashkenazic rabbis are very, very non-liberal. So if you read the Sephardic, some of their answers, you'd think they're almost Reform or conservative because they don't have to become so strict to create any walls. They don't need to make walls because there's nowhere else to go. If a Reform movement ever starts in the Sephardic world, which is not likely, it's a very small population, mostly in Israel, then they may have to become more strict. And so that's one of the reasons this Kitniot debate has become even more so as the Orthodox have become even more strict on these rules in many respects, understandably. Larry.
Israel's got a very complicated legal system because they have both religious laws and civil laws. And even among non-Jews, for example, they have Sharia law, which applies to the Arabs, and they have Christian law, which I guess applies to all the different sects. There are 7 different, as I understand it, Christian courts there. And then they have the civil laws, which supposedly apply to everybody. Now, but are the religious laws in Israel Sephardic in nature, or are they Ashkenazic in nature?
Well, again, remember the religious laws at courts, the court system is not dealing with your eating kitniot. You would just go to your rabbi.
Things like marriage, for example.
Marriage, right.
In marriage or divorce or...
You will go to whichever one. When it's something like that, you can go to one that specifically has somebody for you. So if you're a Sephardic couple, you can go to Sephardic rabbi.
Oh, okay.
If you have a dispute, I'm disputing with Larry over something, we might go to the religious court. However, if Larry's accused of theft or something, and I'm not part of the religious world, then we would have to go to the secular courts. Or if it's something like murder, or something, there's not that much murder in Israel, but it does happen. So when it's some sort of federal law, then you would go to the regular courts. And there is, I don't know always the exact which one goes to which, but that's generally how it is. So if you and Ron are both part of this particular Ashkenazi community and you go to court and you get the verdict wrong, you can't then say, I'm going to go to federal court now and see if I get a better decision. But you can at the beginning say, I want to go to, I don't want to go to religious court. I want to go to the legal court. And
Israel has
so,
a chief rabbi, right?
one more time.
Israel has a chief rabbi.
It does have a chief rabbi.
It is how is he elected or appointed, or is he Sephardic or Ashkenazic, or doesn't that matter?
It does, but it's usually Sephardic. I think there have been Ashkenazic ones. I'm trying to remember if they have a chief. I have absolutely no idea how they're selected. Does anybody know how they're selected? I know Rav Kook was obviously the first one pre-Israel, but I don't know how they're selected. That's a good question. I haven't decided to run yet, so. Flossie.
I remember years ago when I grew up hearing Sephardic and Ashkenaz, it was more geographically where your family and your roots came from. Is it basically like that now as far as the demarcation line? I don't think I would, the way you're talking, I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, an Ashkenazim would go and say, I think I'm going to become Sephardic now.
Yeah.
You usually stay in where you.
Yeah, it's usually do. You usually stay. It's often based upon where your ancestors came from in Eastern Europe, but not always. There are movements like Chabad, which began as a movement based in the city of Lubavitch, I think is in now present-day Russia, but of course has expanded greatly. To be Chabad, you do not have to be descended from anybody who's come from that area. You just basically have to be Jewish. So it will depend, especially in the Ashkenazic world, often where your family came from. It'll depend on which rabbi you follow. That's often the case because you give the power to the rabbi by deciding to follow him. So yeah, that will be certainly. And there's a lot of different groups. There's a lot of them, some smaller, some bigger.
Is the Haggadah the same between the Sephardic Seder and the Ashkenazic Seder?
No, there are subtle differences, and there's subtle differences. Remember, every Haggadah is going to have subtle differences from every other one. Even the traditional ones have different things in there. So there are going to be subtle differences in some cases. So there will, but yes, there will be differences.
But there are differences.
Let's go to Jane. Let me go back to the gallery view. Sorry.
Is even in the prayers. If you say the Kiddush, and one is Sephardic and one is Ashkenazi.
No, certain prayers are a lot of the prayers, most of them go from one to the other. There are exceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they'll be same for those things.
Yeah.
Jeff?
Yes, Rabbi. I just checked that. The rabbi, the chief rabbi of Israel, is selected semi-political process. It's selected by a group of 150 mayors, rabbis, minister, judges, and lawmakers, and electors, handpicked by the political parties, who meet for a 3-hour conference and then determine in an eternal vote who will be the chief rabbi.
Does not sound semi-political to me.
It's a balagan.
Yeah. It does not sound semi-political to me at all.
Yeah. So
Way beyond semi-political.
yeah, it's a tough process, I guess.
Yeah. Ron?
Okay. A good few months ago in Brooklyn, New York, you had a wedding and they estimated 10,000 Orthodox Jews there. I mean, are they Sephardic? Are they Ashkenazic? What sect are they?
I know it's almost very likely Ashkenazic if they're in New York. By far the largest percentage is, I don't even know if you get that many in one area. But again, remember, in that world, you have a very big fence, and your whole life is based upon your world. And if some big macher has died or his daughter is getting married, that your whole world centers on that person. And so you have to be there. It's like all those funerals. They had several very well-known rabbis die of COVID-19. And the irony was, there are thousands of people right next to each other at their funerals, because honoring a rabbi who's died is a huge deal in that world. Huge, especially if they're very well known. And so, and plus, and some people in that world do not believe in science also. They've kind of gone backward on that idea. And so a very high percentage of people actually in that world have gone back, and it's obvious why they had to do it. If they didn't go backwards in science, they were going to lose a lot of people. If a lot of those people could speak the language of the land, knew how to do science and computers, then they can just leave whenever they want. They may get lured away. Whereas if you restrict all of these things, they won't want to go there. If you say they're terrible things and that you're going to not go to heaven if you do them, it's going to restrict people from leaving. Flossie.
Remember growing
Okay,
up
go ahead.
that my, am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. That my Zeta had to finish the Seder before midnight. What is the reason that we have to, and can we start it at any time?
Well, there is a thought that you're supposed to finish it at midnight. That is not a steadfast rule. That's one of the thoughts. However, midnight is a very subjective number. We have created a fictional system, but where midnight is 12 p.m. But that is not in actuality midnight by any stretch of the imagination. So, you have to decide for yourself if that is actually midnight and if you're allowed to go to the next Michael.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because, in one part of the Haggadah, the rabbis are debating, and then one of their students comes in and says it's time for Shacharit, so they've been doing it all night, and presumably it's still part of the Seder.
Oh, yeah.
It's supposed to finish by midnight. It never, I always thought that was a kind of a contradiction there.
Yeah, and you can always do something legalistic like, it's not midnight in Central Time yet. That's kind of how they do it. Jeff.
It's one of my earliest recollections of a Seder over at my grandparents' house, reminding my grandfather quite properly, please complete it by midnight as is traditional, because I don't even remember, I guess maybe I was just bar mitzvahed at the time, but I know I was very tired and hoping to get out of there before 1 o'clock in the morning.
But you also have to remember, if you finish at the Seder at midnight, it doesn't mean the Seder's over. Because that just means you've done next year in Jerusalem. you can start singing. Oh, that's why in the Haggadah, there's all these songs afterwards.
Oh, I
And
know.
who knows one, and so you can just keep singing all night long.
Yeah.
So the Seder may officially have ended, but it's still going on. And I've been at a Seder where it went way past 1:00 too. All right. Yes, Flossie.
Did you get the saying that I sent you thinking you'd enjoy it?
Which one was that?
I heard 3 rabbis talking and they were saying about, it was on the phone, it wasn't an email. And they said, it's the prayer, not the.
I did not get a message from you.
Oh, okay. Well, I sent one. I thought you would have fun with that comment.
It looked like you called. I think it says you called, but there's no message.
Okay, well, I would never call and not talk. So
Yeah. It definitely wasn't a message.
Anyway, it was about services should be more about prayer than the chairs or where you
being
sit.
there,
Huh?
well, not so much where you sit, but they were talking about with COVID. It's the prayer that's important, not that you have to all
Oh,
be
okay.
together in the chair. So
Right.
I thought you'd have fun with that. So
Well, hopefully everybody has a nice COVID Seder. Arlene?
I just got to throw this out. When I was a kid growing up, how I knew it was Passover is when I went upstairs. My grandparents lived upstairs, and if I went into the bathroom, there were fish in the bathtub. My grandmother was going to
Oh,
make
my
a filter
goodness.
fish, and I always thought, Passover's coming on.
Were they live fish or dead fish?
Live.
Probably live fish.
Well, here in Sun City, we have a lot of lagoons, but I haven't caught a whitefish or a pike yet.
You got about 2 days to catch it and make it into a ball.
And you
Why
need a
don't you save
special-
time?
you
Yeah.
need a special bait to catch a gefilte.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Very good.
Very
That's the
good.
only difference between Jews and Christians. When they catch a gefilte fish, they throw it back.
I know Jews who do too.
I still don't know how I can I'm a very picky eater, always have been, but I like gefilte fish, and it's just probably that's something that was ingrained in me it's so exciting you get to eat the gefilte fish once a year. And now I realize it's kind of disgusting, but I still like it. So
I don't know why it's delicious.
it's delicious to me, but you look at people who are not raised eating it, it is not delicious.
Well, all you gotta do is put Gold's horseradish on it.
And it has to be goals. It has to
Okay.
be goals.
Although there was that Gal Gadot, did anybody see that where she was on? What's the name of the talk show guy? I think he's got the Carson, where Carson was. Jimmy
Johnny
Fallon.
Carson?
Jimmy Fallon.
Oh, Jimmy Fallon.
If you go online, he's with Gal Gadot, the Israeli woman who plays Wonder Woman, and they're trying foods from each other's countries, and it's pretty funny. So she's never had, for instance, Taco Bell, and he's never had gefilte fish. And so if you see it online, it was a very cute little thing.
Boy, there's 2 foods that everybody wants to eat.
Yeah,
You know?
Taco Bell.
No.
I remember
No,
years ago,
I did eat it before, huh?
I remember years ago, I think when we were still in New Jersey, there were a big movement to try different kind of chlorosis. And there were chlorosis that were made with pears and chlorosis that were made with, dates and all kinds of, maybe Sephardic style recipes and things of that nature. I guess they're still popular. I just,
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Because there's
Iranian.
dozens of different chlorosis.
There's no rule as to how to make haroset. It's actually almost nothing at all. Generally just has to look like the bricks and taste and be sweet. That's kind of the only rule there is. Michael?
Yeah, we have some friends in Virginia, and one of their friends who would go to their Seder with us every year is they were Iranian, and they got out in the late 70s, and she would always bring the harosis, and I would always eat all of it. It was
Dates and
nuts,
yeah.
It was just so wonderful,
You should have, that's what we use here. I don't know which, I think it may have been Rabbi Belzer's wife.
Yes.
Yeah, it
who
was.
came up with so Brian, when Brian makes it, he uses the dates, and it is
Yes.
Absolutely delicious.
It was Arlene Belzer.
Arlene Belzer.
It was our, I don't know if it was our
Yeah,
Yeah, that was
mother
her
or,
recipe.
yeah.
yeah, so he still uses that. I grew up, it's really where you live. I'm from America. We grew up with the apples and cinnamon. But if you're from the Middle East, you're using dates. So Michael, and then we'll finish there.
I will just share this story because I think it's a very nice story. These same people who hosted, we would go to their house one night. They would come to our house one night, and somehow somebody couldn't get a shank bone one year, and for the Seder plate, and so we would bring it back and forth. Well, we moved. And I think the first year we actually we couldn't mail it. I don't remember exactly what happened, but the thing wound up splitting in half. And they have one half and we have one half. And both families use that same shank bone. We've been here 8 years. And
There's nothing that says you can't use half a shank bone.
Just ask Publix, they'll order it for you.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know where I think we're borrowing ours this year from Lucille and Caton. I think she's got a couple of them. Well, we have a wonderful holiday. Do we have anything that we want to study for next week? We've done a couple of weeks in a row of Passover, so we may want to do something else. We didn't get to most of the stuff I had prepared for Passover, so we can do that as well. That would be 4 weeks of Passover. Is that too much?
Nah, it's a big holiday.
It is a big holiday. So do you want to do Passover one more time?
Sure.
Or
Let's see information you have. I mean, that'll be fine.
Okay, because what was the list? Where's the list? Here it is. No, that's not it.
Another possible suggestion is there's been some court rulings that have come up in Israel regarding marriage, and
Oh yeah,
I think some of those, if you want to discuss those at a future meeting, I think they would be interesting. As far as it seems like a liberalization of the positions on marriage for the Reform and Conservative.
what might be good to talk about now is the election.
Yeah.
The results as of last night were not in, but they're pretty sure it's going to be a stalemate again. So we'll see.
Oh, Netanyahu didn't win it. I thought he got more seats, but didn't win.
Well, you got to remember, it's not how many seats your party gets, it's how many people you can bring into the coalition. His party got, I think, 6 less. As of last night, I think they were estimating 6 less seats, but not enough. Not enough to get the coalition he would want. So he'd have to find a coalition of. He may even get some from one of the Arab parties he was looking at, and he might do it because he's very good at finagling and these things together. So I don't know if he's, again, who knows, but I think that'd be very interesting because by next week we'll know what's exactly going on.
Yeah, give us an election update. That would be very interesting.
And then we'll do it. I'll give another election update in September for their next election because they're gonna. It sounds like they're gonna have another one. Boy, I bet Ben Gurion is turning in the grave, seeing how hard it is just to get the one coalition.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll do
Rabbi,
Israeli election update.
Rabbi, are you doing the 4 clergy this afternoon?
We are, although I may have to leave. I may have to go on this thing that I may be needed for something that is important I just found out about. So, but I'll be there for the first 30 minutes at least.
Okay.
Okay.
Everyone,
I need to leave, so I will wish
it's
everybody.
nice to be with my friends as we represent 3 states again. No, happy Passover, everybody. Again, our Seder will be 6 p.m. Anything you need, let us know.
Have a Zis Pesach.
You too, guys.
Stay
safe.
Same to you.
Take care, everybody. See you all.
Larry.
Stay safe.